Andrew does make a good point that there really isn't. If you just look at BBC Newsnight Scotland, it doesn't look like kind of a program that has much money put into it, which I think is probably fair to say, and it isn't able to perform that function adequately. I sometimes you feel almost when you're sitting up watching it that you are the only one. If it wasn't for Twitter, I think I would have stopped watching it, because at least it proves that you're not completely mad, or maybe you are, but at least there's somebody else mad with you. And I think we are lacking those forums to have these kind of debates. And I'd like to be as optimistic as Andrew is. I really would. And I'd like to see this happen, but at the moment, I still feel that we lack that civility at the moment to have those kind of debates where people can disagree with one another without it becoming ad hominem, or without it really calling into question various aspects of the other person's wider belief system, where people can disagree. And I still feel that we don't have a medium which we can do that.
Yes, because I mean, one of the key things I think fundamentally is you can only have a debate if you agree on lots of stuff, or if you agree fundamentally on how to talk. What are the terms of the debate? What's at stake? It's one of these things. I know it sounds a wee bit paradoxical, but I think it's fundamentally true that you can only really have.
No, it is, and I think so. But I think we overplay the role, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a newspaper journalist. We overplay sometimes the role of newspapers in that newspapers have a role to play, but there's other forms as well. And I do think if you're talking about the media, broadcast is very important, which in the UK does mean the BBC, because we don't really have. Obviously, there's Fourth One. There is some radio, but it's overridingly the BBC and STV. And I know STV are trying a bit more Scotland Tonight, but I do think we do need that kind of needs to be much wider than it currently is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And also, there's exciting. There's an interesting prospect here. That's what seems to be the really sad thing about it. It's not as if there aren't things to talk about. It's not as if there aren't controversies to be explored, challenges to be investigated, interesting new ways of thinking and talking about Scotland, which is a country which, in my view, is fundamentally under-talked about, under self-examined in terms of the people here. And so that's the frustration for me. It's a frustration which is fundamentally rooted in a sense that there's so many resources there for interesting things. And this idea that we're peripheral is just outrageous. It's absurd. There's so much to say.
Just to bring Philip in on that. So, like, what Andrew's talking about is, that under-resourced, there's not this conversation. But one thing that you'd have a perspective, because if Andrew talks to someone in England about the independence debate, then he's Scottish, so they're going to be quite guarded about it. But like, if you speak to someone about it, are people even talking about it at all in London? What kind of opinions have you had about it or heard about it?
Well, I haven't heard anything, to be honest. It's not an issue as far as I know. I'm not a great social gadfly, so it's difficult to tell. But you don't see it on the front pages of the Evening Boris. You don't see it on the front pages of Metro. It's not. No, I haven't seen anything about it or heard anything about it. If I wasn't online, I wouldn't know it was happening.
But that's that. I mean, just in terms of history, in terms of politics, in terms of sort of the sociology of it, that's fascinating as a kind of outcome about how the British state does not perceive that its own existence is fundamentally at stake, and even looking at the polling, in peril.
Well, you shouldn't take my perspective as gospel.
I think that's fair, but it reflects my own. I mean, I live in Oxford at the moment, and that's how I feel as well. People sort of think, well, it's not really it's a little bother on the northern frontier, which can be comfortably ignored, and domestic Westminster-focused politics can continue quite untroubled on any level. I think that's profoundly odd, actually, as an outcome.
But what I was thinking about while you were talking before was how, first of all, when people read the news, how much of it do they actually believe, and how far does it really affect them? And secondly, how far does the online community represent everybody else?
I mean, for myself, obviously there's interesting studies which have taken place through things like critical discourse analysis on the media, particularly Glasgow was good frontiers place in the academic terms in terms of that particular study, and skeptical analysis of what the press promotes. But I think the second point is interesting too. I mean, I'm very skeptical personally about the penetration about these online debates, partly because I participate in them. I kind of know how many people visit my blog. I know how many people listen to this podcast. And as a result, you think, well, in terms of a vast society engaging with these tools of debate, it just is not doing so yet. And I think that's is often kind of an overstated kind of thing, this power of social media. I think Peter and I, we discussed that offline a wee bit before about the overstating of the value of this social media material and this kind of Obama-esque new future, which is full of glitzy networkers who all connect up and transform the world. But Peter, I don't know what you think about that.
I do think that's yes. I think you've probably characterised some of my views quite succinctly there. I do think we have a tendency, and especially those of us who proliferate around online discussions, have a tendency to overprivilege privilege our own roles in some of these discussions, and just the discussions that we either sit in on or partake in ourselves. I think in a way it is a human. Like, it is interesting to see that social media has given people an opportunity to have conversations that they couldn't really have had really before it started, and that is true. And the extent to which people have engaged in these conversations does show how, despite the fact that a lot of less people are voting, how people are engaged in ways, people are political. And I think what it means to be political is changing a lot. And party politics is changing quite quickly, and I think that's something, post financial crisis in particular, and there has been a kind of far more systemic crisis of representative democracy without going too far. And I do think there is a certain point to that in the West, but that is really exciting and really interesting. But there is, I think, by the same token, a danger of kind of really over-privileging what these online debates mean and what these online discussions mean. I think we have seen that politics. I think Occupy was quite an interesting, almost case study in that politics coming full circle quite quickly. And obviously that movement did make some gains, but it was interesting. The Radical Independence Conference that myself and Andrew were at last week, I counted 2 mentions of the word Occupy. One was Jerry Hassan crediting us with occupying the Radisson Blu Hotel, which is quite funny. And one was just that conference had taken place a year previously, you would have had entire seminars about Occupy.
Yeah, no, and actually, and that's perhaps a nice place to draw to a close, with slight echo of where we began, which is groupthink and the capacity of limited conversations and limited conversationalists to perpetuate their own sense of what the world looks like, what politics looks like, and what its limits are. It's a kind of perilous theme, perhaps, of this particular podcast.
Have we groupthinked on groupthink? Do you think?
So have we groupthink? I feel we may have done. I certainly didn't. I think you did for a moment or two there.
Is that better than double thinking on groupthink?
Double plus white good, black ungood, I think is my answer to that question.
We've gone way over time here, but okay, who cares? There's St. Andrew's Day yesterday, and there's been talk about this quite often, making it a national holiday. Like, the Irish have St. Patrick's Day. I think in England, St. George's Day is not a national holiday and nobody really cares.
Yes.
There's been talk about having a national holiday with St. Andrew's Day. I would much prefer, this is just my opinion, but I would prefer, if they're going to make a Scottish national holiday, why not do it with Burns Night? Because, there's St. Andrew has nothing to do with Scotland. Apparently there's some relics of his were brought, but they do that all the time everywhere. And then, we're living in an increasingly irreligious society, which is fine by me. Like, why not make more statues to writers and poets? And why not make Burns Day the national day? Burns Night the national, or Burns Day national night, whatever. So what do you think of that? But much better to have it as a non-religious holiday or something with religion.
Yes, maybe we should ask. Well, I guess Philip that as someone who doesn't have a dog in this particular race, I would assume, unless you're a particular devotee of St. Andrew as your personal saint.
No, not particularly. A couple of things came to mind. One was, I think Philip Glass said it, the composer. He said it's very sad in the States that they have a JFK airport and all these places named after politicians, but there's no sort of Jackson Pollock airport. And somebody else said, a cartoonist, he wrote on the subject of bank holidays in England or in the UK, that it's very sad that most of our holidays aren't religious or patriotic, but we're allowed to leave the rowing benches when the banks stop counting money for a day.
Yes. Yeah.
But yes, I think sort of holidays for cultural figures is a very good idea. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Peter, what do you think about that?
I must confess, I'm quite nonplussed by St. Andrew's Day in general, because it seems every year I hear a little bit more about it, but I only ever realise it's the day it's happened. So it's St. Andrew's Day, and I find myself kind of scurrying for like Wikipedia or something to find out what exactly St. Andrew's Day is. Yeah, as long as you don't turn it into another bloody St. Patrick's Day, I'll be happy.
I always remember it just because it's also my best mate's birthday, so it's kind of a good way to remember it. But that's the only kind of connection I have with it.
I always forget. I mean, there was some sort of bad-tempered snark on Twitter about how no one ever hails anyone in the street and says Happy St Andrew's Day. And certainly I never had, and I must admit, as an unpatriotic Scottish nationalist, I had no idea what day it was or which saint it had been consecrated to. So I imagine that's me in the black box of failure for my. But yeah, I mean, I think it matters though, and like Michael was saying, it matters who we choose to honour. It matters in whose honour we choose to make our public holidays. And as Philip says, celebrating the closure of the booths in the bank seems a pretty dismal prospectus for which to found a sense of civic liberation. And the same is true, perhaps. I'm an atheist, so I may say so of saints. I'm not entirely sure that I'm sure St Andrew had his virtues, but and I am named after him perhaps as well. So I suppose I ought to be relatively more.
Is there anything he's actually supposed to have done? I mean, we know George killed the dragon, and we know St Patrick drove the snakes away. But what did St Andrew do?
I think he died. He died. On the cross, on a cross. In fact, I was reading a lovely, Ian Smart had a reference to a lovely wee blog about the imagery of St Andrew and about how he begged to die as his master had died on the cross, and had a lovely Caravaggio picture, which is as always with Caravaggio, is amazingly emotionally profound and attractive. So I'll maybe that might make you more sympathetic to the poor fellow as he goes to his reward in the next life.
Well, I just pulled up the Wikipedia page, and it's not entirely flattering. I just found the funniest sentence. In the Gospel, Andrew is referred to as being present on some important occasion.
But to be honest, in political terms, being present on important occasions can now make you a member of the House of Lords if you play your cards right. So there are contemporary and more secular benefits to presence. Yes. And on that note, perhaps we should probably draw this somewhat extended podcast to a wee close. I'd like to thank both of our guests an awful lot for coming on. Thank you, Philip, as our designated Sassenach for the afternoon, and Peter as our designated Erse, as someone once put it in an awful anti-Irish book which I've got. Thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me. And your contributions were really interesting. And we'll be back again, I hope, next week for episode 7 of the podcast. We're marching slowly towards our number 10. And as we live in a decimal culture, that's particularly exciting. And I hope you'll join us again then for more discussion about Scottish politics, UK politics, politics in the world and in Europe. And we'll see you then. Cheerio.
Well, some people try to pick up girls and get called asshole. This never happened to Pablo Picasso. He could walk down your street, girls could not resist the stare, and so Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole.